Good evening, everyone. Pleasure to spend another Wednesday night with all of you, both physically here and virtually here in cyberspace. And I welcome everyone here, those that I've recognized and those I hear for the first time. And it's already a custom, in Jewish custom, that though we are several weeks before Rosh Hashanah, we already wish each other, in the Hebrew terms, our ksiva v'chsim tova, which means to be written and sealed for a good and healthy year. So I open up with that blessing to all of you. And it should be both successful year materially and spiritually, and all in good health. And in a revealed manner. Many times blessings come to us, but they're not always so revealed. So it'd be good to emphasize that it should be revealed and on our terms, so to speak, not just on God's terms. So with that being said, being that we have chosen the theme of Elul this month, the Hebrew month, and every month has its theme. So the theme of this month is love. Based on the principle that this month, Elul, like it is with all Hebrew words and Hebrew names, has an acronym, and the acronym is the four Hebrew letters Aleph, Lamed, Vav, Lamed. Ani ledodi v'dodi li, which means I am to my beloved and my beloved is to me. Which in its own poetic way, a verse from the Song of Songs, really refers to the secret and the basic dynamic of every relationship, that it's reciprocal. I am to my beloved and my beloved is to me. That both should be giving and both should be receiving. And the interesting thing, you begin with the giving part, not the receiving part. I am to my beloved, and then my beloved is to me. Which is also one of the secrets of relationships, not to wait. You know, in business, everything's tit for tat. You give as much as you get, or if you're particularly savvy, you give less than you get, and you make them think you're giving as much. But in relationships, it's actually the other way around. You give more than you take. And even when you take, you make believe it's less than what you really should be taking. So, in other words, it's driven by the generosity of spirit and the celebration of a part of ourselves that's not focused on profit and on personal gain and what am I getting for what I'm giving. Because as soon as you get into that calculation, every relationship will have to somewhere crack. Because relationships are complicated. They're about life. And about life means that sometimes people fluctuate, and they go through the different vicissitudes. And that means that sometimes a person may be, God forbid, not well, or particularly needy. So if you're going to go calculate and say, well, you know what, the last 3 years you were more needy than I was, and now we have to get equal treatment, how many relationships can survive that type of scrutiny? So, therein lies, of course, the complications and the struggle and the battle of life in general, and particularly love and relationships. So within Elul itself, this month of love, where we focus and we try to address the love in our own life, there's also 4 different weeks, because the month consists of 4 weeks. The Hebrew calendar is a lunar calendar, so it's usually 29 or 30 days. Elul is 30 days. So it's 4 weeks. And each week has its own particular energy within the love itself. And one of the ways to discover what the particular theme within the theme of love, the subset, so to speak, is to look at the portion of the Torah that we read that week. Each week has its own portion. Last week's portion was Shoftim, and this week's portion of the book of Deuteronomy is called Teitzei. And the verse begins in this week's portion. It says, Teitzei le'milchama alevecha, which means when you will go out to battle upon your enemies. And then the verse continues that God will give you, and God will give you the power to conquer, to vanquish, to overcome your enemies. The Shalah, one of the great mystics and scholars of the 16th, 17th century, 16th century, writes that the portions of the Torah are connected to the times in which they are read. So we can conclude from that in this week's portion, it itself can teach us messages and lessons in the theme of love. So when you hear the word love and you hear the word battle, war, unfortunately, more often than not, many of us have witnessed or been part of both of the two. I remember having traveled quite extensively around the world and speaking. So there's one particular place I traveled to, and as they were planning the lecture topics, the program director contacted me and asked me through my experience, what are the most popular themes people want to hear about? And obviously every city has its own issues, but there are certain central themes that are pretty universal. And I said, well, among all the different topics that I've discovered, number one topic is always love, relationships, sexuality, intimacy, anything in that category. That's one. And number two is the topic of pain and suffering. So the program director says to me, those aren't two topics, it's the same thing. So actually that became the theme, love and suffering, basically. I didn't really like the title. It's not very life-affirming, let's put it that way. But the obvious suggestion here is that love is a two-sided or double-edged sword, as they say. Two-sided coin, which means with love always comes something else. Because once you are in that state of mind, it means you're also in a state of vulnerability. Love is connected to trust and connected to finding someone that nurtures, comforts, and is different than everyone else out there, the strangers, so to speak, in our midst. And therefore, when you're open and vulnerable like that, you can be hurt. And when you're closed and don't let anyone into your life, so yeah, the upside is that maybe you can get hurt, but the downside is you also cannot have relationships. And often we fluctuate and between the two poles. On one hand, we all would love to be able to find someone we can fully trust and love and be loved and know that no matter what happens, you'll not be abandoned and won't be hurt, definitely not intentionally. But at the same time, life's experiences has taught us very often, more often than not, that it's not that simple. It doesn't always happen that way. Here you have two people who are in love with each other one day. A year or two later, they're in major war, court, or in other ways that they are fighting with each other. And that's just one side of it. So the whole issue of love and relationships is far more complex than just the idealism that we all would love to be able to discover. Last week I discussed the early stages of our lives when love is first given to us. Even before we enter this world, just being nurtured and surrounded in the embryonic fluids, our mother's womb, which in a microcosm is similar to the entire universe as it began its conception in a state of submergence in water, which the mystics explain is what really love is all about. True love is like feeling completely protected, completely immersed, submerged in something beyond yourself, and feeling that comfort. There's all kinds of different scientific theories why people gravitate to beaches, to the water. Beachfront property, you like to go swimming. Obviously, with keeping a certain distance, not too deep into the water. But there's a certain, we are drawn to it. So there are the radical evolutionists who suggest that people are drawn to it because we are amphibians in our root. We were once frogs and tadpoles, and therefore we are returning to our roots, where we originate from, the water. If you like that theory, that's fine. I'm not going to argue with you if that's what you feel you like. And the Torah and the mystics explain the reason we're drawn to water is because water is the pure state of seamlessness, of love and connection that we all somewhere in our hearts crave for, because it's really the essence of who we are and how we began our lives. Of all the greatest people of all in the Torah, who's the greatest personality of all? Moses. And his name, actually, given by his Jewish parents, was not Moses, was not Moshe. Most people don't even know what his name was that they gave him at his bris. The name that we call him, Moses, Moshe, is a name given to him by Pharaoh's daughter. And as the Torah describes, what happened was that his mother Yocheved, Moses' mother Yocheved, hid him in a basket in the reeds, by the Reed Sea, or the Red Sea, to protect him from the decree of Pharaoh that he would kill all the male children. And Pharaoh's daughter went bathing in the river Nile, and she saw this child hidden in a basket. And she drew her hand. Minamayim mishisiyu, the Torah says, because I drew this child out of water. In Hebrew, the word to draw out of water means Moshe. So she gave him that name, and that became his permanent name forever. The name from Pharaoh, who was the Hitler of those times, daughter, the one who persecuted and killed and enslaved so many Jews. His daughter gave Moshe the name Moshe because she drew him out of water. This becomes his name, and we call it Torah Moshe, the Torah of Moses. And that's the only name we ever use for him throughout the Bible, Great Moshe Rabbeinu. Seems somewhat odd that his own biological mother gave him a name. Not name we don't even know. Most of us don't know. The Medrash talks about it. They give different versions of the name. And the name that he actually that we actually use is actually not. It's not even. It's like a nickname. That has nothing to do with Moshe by birth. So the mystics, the Kabbalah and Hasidic thought, answer the question with a brilliant approach. And this all goes back to that theme of love, of seamlessness and connection. That Pharaoh's daughter, whether she knew it or not, consciously or not, actually captured the essence of Moshe's soul. That Moses' soul comes from the world of water. In the spiritual realms, they are considered to be like two worlds. There's called the hidden worlds of the water, and there's the revealed worlds of land. On land, you see every creature. In water, everything is submerged under the waters. So it symbolizes, as they write, that connection where everything just melts into one, where you only see the water. And when you look at the surface of an ocean, you have no clue what kind of thriving life is beneath the surface, even more complicated, and more creatures and more species that are on Earth. That symbolizes, as the mystics put it, the world of bittul. I've used that word many times, and it's the secret of all life, and the secret of all love, for that matter. What is bittul? Bittul is a Hebrew word, which is very difficult to translate into English, but it captures the essence of all growth, and really of all healthy relationships. The best way to translate it would be a combination of modesty, humility, and maybe the best description I usually use is suspension of self. So you show me any process of growth in your life, in anyone's life, in all of history, and I will show you, or I don't know, you could show yourself, that preceding it was always a state of suspension of a previous state. You have to shed a layer of skin to assume a new one. You have to shed a perspective, an old perspective, to learn a new one. Every growth precedes, every creativity is the child of frustration. And the greater the creativity, the more that the frustration that precedes it. Like you're researching, let's say, some idea, some concept. There's always going to be a state of confusion. The first time, it's almost devastating. You think that you're lost. You're never going to find your way out of this. So the more you gather information, the more you gather, there comes a point where there's so much information, you have no clue whether you're coming or going. And then, something magical happens. After a while, sitting with you, gestating, processing, things start emerging. And then when it emerges, it's like that moment, the flashbulb moment, aha. And you suddenly realize a deeper truth that is like more than the sum of the parts of all these details. But the confusion is always necessary. Because if it wasn't, it wouldn't be a new revelation. It would just be an extension of your past. Every birth every birth is preceded by a pain. Birth pains. That's why it's a birth. A seed has to deteriorate, has to rot before it grows into a plant. And we all in our lives, many times, the transitions of our lives, the true transitions, when you turn into something like a new metamorphosis, will always come with some type of loss of something before. So while you're in the middle of that vacuum, that's what the Kabbalists call the ayin, meaning between every state of two states of being, there's a vacuum, there's a empty space. So while you're there, it's extremely disconcerting, because you're not here, you're not there. I think I've shared with you my own little summer experience many years ago, just as an example. So I remember I was a kid. I learned to swim. I remember when, what age, 7, 8 years old. And then, of course, came the day I decided I want to dive into a pool. But the thought was terrifying. And I remember entire summers, not one summer, but summers, standing there on a diving board, counting to 10 every day, and never diving. You know, that counting to 10, okay, I'll count again, and then lunch, and then the night comes, and the next day, you know how these things. It's called procrastination. Any of you have any doctorates in procrastination? Anybody have? You know? You have a procrastination anonymous, if you wish to. So, and I was terrified. And I knew how to swim relatively well. And I think in retrospect, what was I scared of? What's the big thing? You jump in, you have that nightmare that you're going to, a belly flop and your stomach will split open or something like that. You know? But what's the worst thing that could happen? You've fallen backwards. And you know how to swim, so you swim. I knew how to swim. It wasn't like I was afraid of water. Anyway, how did I end up learning how to dive? Not that you're interested, but I'll share with you, because it's important for the message here. I decided, you know what, okay, forget about the diving board. That's too high up. Then I tried, of course, just the edge of the pool. Then I decided, you know what, I'll sit down at the edge of the pool and just like lean over. And of course, that also didn't work. Until a good friend of mine just basically kicked me in. Saw me doing it a few days, and then just without me noticing, came over and just pushed me in. And lo and behold, nothing happened. And after that, I dived from the edge and from a diving board and from higher diving boards, etc., etc. So as I grew into an adult, I think to myself, like, so what was the terror? What's so scary? I'm standing on the ground. Okay, I know how to swim in the water, and I submit. It's just a theory. There's no proof that perhaps the fear that I had, and maybe many of you have had in similar situations, was the unknown. That split second when you're not on the ground and you're not in the water, being it's something you've never experienced. So even though it's just a split second, and logically a second later you're in the water, that unknown scares us. Because you don't have the anchoring of the ground, and you don't have the water to swim in. And if you apply this to different situations, you'll see the most challenging part of most fearful moments in our lives are when we don't have those bearings, the coordinates, basically, that we're accustomed to. But how is growth possible if you remain in your old coordinates? Or, as we would call it, our comfort zones. So, whether we like to hear this or not, the fact is growth comes when you get out of your comfort zone. And best not to be forced out, best to force yourself out. Because when you're forced by others or you're forced by God, it's not always that pleasant. Not that it's pleasant to force yourself. This is the fundamental concept of bittul that Moses embodied. So when she drew him out of the water, as I said, though whether she knew it or not is not relevant, Moses embodied this concept of a person who did not take himself very seriously. He took the cause seriously. Always felt that he was connected to a source called water, life. And that like a fish in water, his life was simply a manifestation, a transparent expression of higher purpose. And that's why his name comes Moshe, because it captures this soul from the hidden worlds. And actually, for Moses, it was a challenge to enter into the revealed world, which is why Moses also found it difficult to speak. Because the world of speech is the world of land, and the world of thought is the world of water. So to apply it to this theme of love and Elul and the battles that we're discussing, if you think about it, in the pure sense of the word, love, yes, if we lived in a world where there was no hostility, a world where nobody hurts each other, you can say the world of the water, where everybody was connected through bittul to something higher than themselves. Meaning self-interest was not the dominating driving force in life, but the channeling of something higher than yourself. And everybody lived that way. Of course, that's utopia. It's hard to imagine even. But just for a moment, let's go for a flight of fancy into a world like that. Yes, then we would have no problem letting up our guard. And would not need to feel the need to defend ourselves, because we wouldn't feel that we're going to be hurt. And it's actually the first time a person falls in love is usually with that type of attitude. Later it's called naivete and foolishness, folly. But in truth, I wouldn't use that word at all. It's when you were pure and you weren't yet jaded by the so-called hostile, cruel world. So the question really is, what is the natural state of life and the natural state of ourselves? So when you've been hurt long enough, you come to the conclusion that's the natural state. Well, I'm here to tell you, and that's what the month of Elul comes to tell us, that it's not the natural state. That no matter how cruel people can be to each other, and how selfish people can behave, and we see manifestations of it in so many different ways, some of them very obvious, and maybe the worst of all are not so obvious. The things that are the subliminal and the word I want to use, subliminal, insidious forces that are not even at the surface. Those are the worst of all because they're not obvious. We don't see them. And they happen perhaps to many of us long before our memories were alive. Meaning when we were little children. We don't know how our parents treated us when we were day one, or year one, or year two. We may know it from the consequences and effects in our lives later. So in the earliest stages of our lives, none of us have memory and recollections of of what was going on. So the forces in the world, there's no question, there's so many hostile ones, that it's very easy to come to the conclusion at some point that this is the natural state of life. And goodness, and virtue, and kindness, and yes, healthy love are an anomaly. The question is that true? Or is the other side true? That love and health and bittul is the natural state of life and of a human being, and the cruelty is an anomaly. So this is not just some type of semantics. It's a fundamental different way of looking at life. So obviously, it's a loaded question coming from me, meaning that it's obvious what I'm going to answer. Because I have no reason to be sitting here with you. If I'm here to just confirm that the world is a hostile, cruel place, you don't need to come here for me to tell you this. And you could hear this or see it and experience it on your own. The whole point why we honor and celebrate this month of Elul is to honor and celebrate a reality that may not always seem so obvious. So the first thing we have to state very loud and clear, unequivocally, is it doesn't matter how many billion people on this planet are selfish. The Torah, Judaism, and this month of Elul doesn't work by numbers. It works by values. The fact is, however, that most of us are conformists. How many of us will go against the tide of 5-6 billion people, and you're the only one that stands on the other side? And we'd like to believe we're such pioneers and free spirits, but I'm not here to challenge you. But the fact of the matter is, if nobody's a conformist, so then we're all originals, then the world would be a lot different. I know maybe no one in this room is a conformist, but most people are. Not necessarily by nature, it's maybe the easier way, the more comfortable way, maybe out of fear, maybe out of pressure, maybe out of just growing up being programmed that you have to go along with what others do. Now the opposite of a conformist doesn't necessarily a person means who's a mutineer that is rebelling against everything. The opposite of conformity doesn't mean a wild person who's breaking all the rules. The opposite of conformity is a person who's confident in the voice of their own soul, their own music, and follows that more than what the majority says or what others will compliment you or insult you for. The opening of the Shulchan Aruch, which is the code of Jewish law, its opening line can seem somewhat even strange, but if you think about it, it's the most important statement before anything when you talk about embracing values. It says, Al yevash mipnei hamaligim. Do not be ashamed of those that will laugh. It basically means that even though you may not be accepted, or may be criticized, or you may be laughed at because you stand out, do not be ashamed of that. Now this doesn't mean you have to go ahead and do crazy things just to get attention. It means, however, that there's a voice in your soul that you believe in. And when that is what guides you. And there's no doubt in my mind, especially from the experience of talking to so many different people and hearing about the challenges and battles around love, that most of the situations that I've seen and read about all come down to not just necessarily whether you can find your soulmate, but it comes down to what you have inside of you that you're confident in. Are you confident in your own voice? Can a person who's truly confident, not confident in their own voice, really find a healthy soulmate, a healthy partner? Because if you don't know who you are, you'll be looking in the other person for an identity. And that's where the imbalance is created, because your expectations are too high, because no one can give you an identity. And vice versa. If two people are searching to each other for identity, so you're talking about two insecure people. So does the equation go that two insecure people makes one secure couple? What do you think? It may sound that mathematically correct, but it doesn't work that way. On the other hand, this doesn't mean you have to be absolutely secure and everything worked out, because part of a relationship is also the adventure, the free abandon, the unexpected. But there has to be a foundation that allows you to be yourself if you're really going to be able to allow another person into your life. Because ultimately, yes, it's true what I said earlier, that love and relationships are connected to vulnerability. But what really is the protection against being vulnerable in this world? So one protection is to close yourself off, as I mentioned, to put up defense mechanisms. And if you're really good at it, they don't even look like defense mechanisms. They look like you're the most open person, but you have it all figured out, consciously, unconsciously. So that's one way to so-called protect yourself. But then really, remember that also, if you don't let anything in, you also don't let anything out. Which really means that there's no real relationship developing here. The other antidote, or the other solution to a vulnerability is being strong enough within yourself and confident enough that you're not afraid of being vulnerable. That, of course, is much more difficult to attain, but that is the goal. So it's not about how do I protect myself from being hurt. This is a world where, unfortunately, sometimes we will be hurt. It's how do you have enough resources that even if you are hurt, you don't get destroyed, and you have enough strength to move on, or to figure out what to do under the circumstance. And the interesting thing is, those of us that are looking for that idealistic, perfect situation are also the ones that are terrified of being hurt, because if we don't find it, what are we left with? And those people who are confident in their own inner self and soul realize that you don't always get exactly what you're looking for. You also don't take so seriously everything about yourself, and you have a sense of humor and a certain flexibility. Flexibility is another manifestation of bittul. So what is this thing called bittul? And how does it play itself out? So let's go back to the verse in the Torah here. And go back to that question I asked before about what is the anomaly? Is the hostile, cruel world the anomaly? Or is goodness and virtue and love the anomaly? So obviously when you talk to Moshe Rabbeinu, Moses of the Torah, so the answer is very clear. Man of the water will tell you very clear. We are connected to our source. We are essentially at our best selfless and transparent channels of higher power. We are basically embodiments of that bittul that I was talking about, that type of suspension of self. And when you're in that place, hostility, battles, and all that is the anomaly. But as I said earlier, that's not the common experience that we all have. So here's what the verse in this chapter says, okay, with a few questions built in. Everything is, in the Talmudic approach, everything comes with a few important questions. When you go out, literally, Teitzei in Hebrew means to go out, alevecha, upon your enemies. So the obvious questions are that in Hebrew and in English, it seems like a strange phraseology. Much simpler would have been said, when you go to war with your enemies. Number one, what is the Teitzei referring to, that you're going out? In Hebrew, Teitzei comes from the word yotza, yitzia, to leave. You're going out. And alevecha means above or upon your enemies. It should have said imaivecha in Hebrew, or be'aivecha, with your enemies. In simple English, when you wage war with your enemies. The Hebrew of that would be kisilcham imaivecha, or be'aivecha. Instead, the Torah adds the word Teitzei, and adds this word im, al, above, then instead of im, with. So without any necessarily profound commentary, if you think about it, the psychological implications of this are tremendous. What the Torah is saying is that war is not your natural state. That when you have to wage war, if you do have to, it's outside of you. And that's why the word Teitzei is used, means you have to go out. Not just physically out of your door, but also psychologically out of your inner space. And the second word change emphasizes that you're never unequal with your enemy, if you wish. You are above them. But that's not the way we see our lives. For many of us, battle and war is the natural state of life. I don't just mean the litigious ones among us that are constantly in court, but in general. You go to work, that's a battleground in one way. The competing forces for raises, for advancing. Sorry? Sales. Is that what you're into? Okay. Even if it's, you have good, healthy co-workers, backstabbing is almost inevitable in any given situation. Then, of course, we're talking about not your peers, superiors, who actually very often set up situations that workplaces should be battles, because then they're able to control it more. You know, that itself is part of the manipulation. And of course, if you end up getting a superior that is not such a pleasant person, there's another battle. And as we all know, anybody in that situation knows these are not small matters. They can change your whole life. They can make your life miserable. Because most of us spend more time at work than at home. So there you got the battle in the workplace. Not that I don't want anybody to think I'm a closet or open Marxist, but if you read little Marx, And I mean Carl, not Groucho. So in a brilliant way, not that he suggested a better alternative, but his critique of capitalism has many, many profound insights. And above all, it's that capitalism is set up, being driven by greed, to pit one person against the other. The haves and the have-nots. And the wealthy, whether we know it or not, will use their power and their leverage to put down those that are less. So they can make more and we can make less. As he puts it in his German terms, the alienation that capitalism creates, alienation from you and yourself, from you and your products, from you and your co-workers, from you and your environment. So in agrarian culture, before the Industrial Revolution, so most people lived close or on farms, and you usually worked, your livelihood was from what you ate from what you worked on. You had a potato farm, you ate potatoes. And sometimes you'd barter them for someone who had another type of farm. But industrialization created a whole new mechanism. With all the blessings, it also created a certain detachment. You know, in New York today, you can get any food, any time of the year, any season. We're out of touch with the natural cycles of things, the natural world. So there are many blessings in this progress, but there's also the other side of alienation. So if anything can be so-called gained from Marx's writings, is understanding these concerns. The question is, what do you do with them? Obviously, his system definitely did not work. It created even more selfishness and more totalitarianism than capitalism did. So I'm not defending his approach, but you can learn insights from everything. So we live in a battleground, basically. I remember at a conference in England, I was invited to deliver a paper in Cambridge. And the topic, the theme of the conference was affluence and spirituality. And the topic they asked me to speak about was wealth and religion. So that's when I brushed up on my Marx and, of course, also on Adam Smith and the other different socialist and capitalist economic theories. I remember coming upon a line that I decided to share with the group, and the line was, I'm trying to remember the exact words, that the work life, our life at work, is outside of our homes. Your home is not your work. Your work is not your home. Therefore, you have to go away from yourself, from your natural state, your natural home, in order to go to work. And I asked the crowd, something like that, I don't remember exact words, but something of that nature. He even used, I think, the word soul. That you're not at home with your own soul when you go to work. It's outside of you. It's actually really a translation of Teitzei Muhammad, whether this author knew it or not, and I'll tell you in a moment who it was. And I asked the audience, who do you think said this? So one person raised his hand, being that he saw me as a man with a beard and a yarmulke. He said the Baal Shem Tov. Another one said the Kotzker Rebbe. Another one said some other Hasidic Rebbe. And I told them, was said by Karl Marx. And yes, it could have been a quote from a Hasidic master. It's interesting how did he come to that. As I said, his alternative is another story. But the concept that we live so-called outside of our natural habitats. And when we go to work, that's the hostile environment that is often the situation. And that's even in the best workplaces. I mean, today, I don't have to even elaborate. You go to work today, you don't even know when you're going to be fired. You know, the higher forces at work. It's not like you're guaranteed just because they liked you yesterday that you're going to stay on. And even if it's for good reasons, it still doesn't make it exactly feel like home. Well, we'll get to that in a minute. Some people's homes are like work. We'll soon discuss. So there's the first battlefield. The second battlefield is at home. One person I remember put it to me so vividly, so poignantly, and said, my home was not a home, it was a house. It was a beautiful house. It was a mansion. And we had all the money in the world. But there was no home. My mother was never home. My father was never home. They gave us toys and gadgets and all the money in the world, and we never had love in our home. So we had a house, and when they did come home, they would fight all the time. Again, this is not a very uncommon situation. So unfortunately, battlefield is not just at work, it's also at home. And then, of course, the ultimate battlefield is you and your psyche. The battles that each of us struggle with internally, which is obviously not disconnected from the battles in our homes, the battles between our parents, and the battles in the world around us. So this Torah, this week's chapter, with one word, puts a whole different spin and perspective on it and says, every war that you will ever fight, it should always be, and is always really outside of you. So that immediately begs the question, so who are you with these, and then who is outside of you? If your natural state of fears, meaning most of your day, most of your life is consumed with one battle or another. And remember, battle doesn't always mean, like in a real war, it doesn't mean you're shooting and fighting all the time. A state of war doesn't mean 24/7 war, physical shooting. You're at war even when you're asleep, because the next morning there's a new battle coming. All you need to have is a lurking enemy, and you have a potential war. That's called a state of war. So if that's most of our lives, then the question that's begged here, so who are you that this war is so-called outside of you? If most of your life you've been around and surrounded by battles, and battles, as I said, doesn't always mean so overt. It can be very subtle and very quiet and very silent. It means that it creates inside of you constant need to defend yourself, or constant mechanisms in place to protect yourself. You know, what do you think happens to a child that's been abused, let's say physically abused, and been slapped more than once? That every time somebody raises their hand to you, the adult thinks they're going to be slapped. And it goes even further. When the people who loved us hurt us, we expect that whoever will love us later in life will also hurt us at some point. And as a matter of fact, they don't hurt us, it sounds weird to us. I know this sounds strange, but this is a true distortion of our psyches that becomes accustomed that hate, that pain comes from the place of source of those that love you. So if that's become so much of your conditioning, and we've like so-called we're rewired, then this verse in the Torah is even more vital to tell us, don't ever think that there's a part of you don't ever think that all of you has become a warrior. War and battles in this life are inevitable, and I'll discuss in a moment why that is. But they never should be confused with who you are. If you have to fight it, you fight it, the minimum, last resort. But never think that you are a warrior. So you have the classic story of Jacob and Esau, the twin brothers, in their mother's womb, who are at war with each other from pregnancy, and then of course later in their lives. And the symbolism of that is that each of us has a Jacob and Esau inside of us. Jacob is like the soul, the scholar, the innocent, the seamless one, the bittul one that I mentioned. And we have an Esau inside of us also necessary, a warrior. And really, we need both to function in this universe. Being too pure, too innocent, and naive can also get you hurt. So we also have to have the warrior. The question, however, is how to balance the two. And also, as I said, to remember that the warrior is never who you really are. So this leads us to the question, why is there a war necessary in the first place? If God, as we say, Hashem Echad, one seamless, unified, all-encompassing, indivisible entity called the divine, put everything into place, so all the mystics wonder the biggest question of all, where then did divisiveness come from? How could unity and oneness create a world of divisiveness? This is one of the biggest questions of the Kabbalah. I would even say it's the core question of all Kabbalah, is this question: unity and duplicity. It would seem that a unified entity should create a unified universe. And yet, it's clear that this universe is not united. It has many, many united elements to it. Scientifically, nature is an unbelievable, unfathomable, awesome symmetry, and impossible to even imagine how it all works together in such a cohesive way. But once you put the human being into the equation, it's far from cohesive. Two people in a room with two opinions. The Jews for sure, but even not. I don't know if it's true or not, but they say in Afghanistan, since it's back in the news, I might as well mention it, that there are two Jews left there, and they don't speak to each other. Because each of them thinks he's the head of the community. Okay. Is that so? Now one left. And he doesn't speak to himself. He's at war with himself. Yeah, that's also possible. So, without going into the whole theological explanations, and I've discussed it in the past and I've written about it, the concept of the tzimtzum, that God did have to conceal himself, God concealed himself in order to allow for another reality to emerge where there can be division and divisiveness. But the ultimate purpose of it all is really a very beautiful one, actually, is because God wanted a partner in this work. As opposed to the myth or stereotype that many people have about religion, including Judaism, that there's one God that sits in heaven and ready to, with a long white beard, ready to strike us with lightning when we misbehave, and we are his subjects. Not at all the way that works. It's a partnership. And whether we understand it or not, and it is theologically thorny, the fact is we affect each other. As a matter of fact, in the Torah itself, you talk about relationships and love. The ultimate relationship and love that is really all love in this world is a metaphor for, is the relationship and love between God and the human being. So it's easy to just say God is like the principal or the boss. And it's a one-way street. God creates us, and we decide he wants to punish us. He punishes us and reward us. And it's like a big father with a bunch of little children. You read Rosh Hashanah prayers, that's not at all the message. You see all kinds of complex relationships. And above all, sometimes you even compare to spouses, to husband and wife. As a matter of fact, in mystical writings, it talks even about the divine as feminine and sometimes masculine, meaning that God, in many ways, has a masculine dimension, masculine energy, and feminine energy. So it's a partnership, and in a partnership there's risk. And the ultimate risk taker of all, the ultimate so-called entity that allowed himself to become vulnerable, above all, is God. Because the stakes are high. Had God not given us free will, then it would have been a pre-written script, and then of course there'd be no purpose. Who needs that? Who needs puppets playing out a script? God gambled and said, I will create the human being in the divine image. As Maimonides says, divine image means free will. The only force in existence that has free will, that can change the course of nature, that can destroy the universe, or can improve it. All creatures on this earth don't have that power. Animals live in the same habitats as they did 500 years ago, 5,000 years ago. They didn't develop fax machines and cell phones and iPhones and Facebook and other so-called, what we call progress. The cows in the field still graze with the same grass. They still breed the same way. They're born and die the same way. One of the Rebbes once said, put it this way, that an animal has never seen the heavens. They walk on all fours, most of them. I remember I once mentioned this in a class, and a guy sent me an email, what about a giraffe? So, in case you have that question, we'll discuss it. There are, obviously it's not just the physiological structure of the animal, so there's a reason for it. Su marim einechem umi bara elah. There's an expression. Raise your eyes to heaven and you see who created all of this. When we who walk upright, human beings, we raise our eyes to heaven and we wonder what's out there. And we spend billions of dollars to feed that curiosity. Not because there's any particular benefit of landing on Mars or the moon. because human beings are curious. What's out there? Is there other life? Yes, once we've traveled there and once we've developed technologies, there are many benefits that we have today. Different type of walking shoes, different technologies were all a derivative benefit from the NASA programs. But that was not the intention. So we look up, and that changes everything. When we look up and we sense the unknown, we want it. And when we want it, we search for better and improve. Animals are not interested in that. Who's happier is another story. You can't really change that. Animal bliss is a very seductive state of being, but I don't know how many of you want to stay there for too long. So we're in this dual battle of seeing that which is beyond us and then having to deal with the realities on the ground. And that itself is a war. It's the war, as some of the Hasidic masters put it, between the wick and the flame. The flame is constantly licking the air, looking upward, reaching upward, defying gravity. And the wick grounds us. We too have these two forces in our lives. I think I've shared with you the story of the Tzemach Tzedek when he was a young child. He was playing on a ladder with other children. And the other kids were afraid to climb to the top of the ladder. He climbed all the way up. Afterwards, his grandfather, who was the famous Alter Rebbe of Shneur Zalman Liadi, author of the Tanya, Shulchan Aruch, said to his grandson, he said, "Tell me, why were you the only one that had the courage to climb to the top of the ladder?" So he answered, "Because Zayda, Grandpa," he said, "when the other children climbed, they kept looking down. So they saw how high they were. They were afraid to climb higher. When I climbed, I kept looking up. I saw how low I was. It motivated me to climb higher." So this is a choice we all make all the time. Hang around with people that are less accomplished than you. You'll always feel better about yourself. You say, "Look, compared to them, look what I've done." Hang around with people more accomplished than you, if you have the courage to do so. It will always make you feel, "Look what I haven't done yet." So we can look both ways. It's important sometimes to look back and see our accomplishments. But growth comes with the ability and the courage to look up beyond. And it's a battle. What we call this the battle between the soul and the body. Or if you wish, the battle between the animal soul and the divine soul. Or some you may call it the battle between the Yetzer Hara and the Yetzer Tov. The evil inclination and the good one. And Jewish thought, this is not an option, is built on the absolute premise that your natural state of being is the looking up option, not the looking down one. So though it may be more comfortable and easier to the status quo, comfort zone, but what is natural to the soul is constant transcendence, aspiration. The key is, how do you balance these two that are sometimes called rotzei and shuv, yearn and return, or tension and resolution? How do you balance looking beyond yourself and seeing things you have not yet reached, and finding the peace to be able to also integrate it? Because if you have too much tension over what you didn't accomplish, that too can paralyze a person. So this is the process, and this is going back to this verse to recognize that the reason there is a battle is because we are partners. It wasn't made easy. It was made, you have your battle, I will conceal, God says, the unity of my being and the unity in your life. And you will be seduced and you will be distracted by many forces that will give you comfort, instant gratification, distract you and stimulate your senses. And I've also given you the wisdom and the soul to be able to focus on the bigger picture. This is your choice. So the battle is not meant to overcome us or to overwhelm us. It's actually meant as a vote of confidence. You can't fight this battle because you're really not from the world of the battle. And that's the Teitzei l'milchama. You go out to it because your natural place, your soul, comes from a greater place where there are no battles. And that soul that pure, seamless soul enters into a world of battle, always retains its personality and its actually protests. I don't really belong here, but at the same time knows that I have to be here to fulfill a purpose, and thus always remains within what's above. And that's alevecha, that though you are encountering adversarial forces, and many of them, you are never shaped or defined by them. You remain above them. Now, of course, all this is predicated on one key element, is knowing who you are and what your home is like. So if you haven't grown up in a home that provided this type of protection for your soul, that's the job that is cut out for you, is how do I create such a home now? And that's why the month of Elul is an entire month. Sometimes it's even connected to the Arei Miklot. It's another one of the acronyms, which means the cities of refuge. This month gives us refuge. Well, refuge from what? From all the forces that attack us. So really what we're talking about here is that each one of us right here in this room, and everywhere in this world, has a very pure, loving soul. It's trapped. It's the bottom line. It is trapped. Question is the extent. It's trapped in a body, and it's trapped in a material world, and it's trapped in a hostile battleground. So you have two choices. You either ignore the soul and become a warrior and fight. Another option is you retreat. I'm not fighting, I'm sick of fighting, and just give up. It's called resignation. So those are battle or resignation. And the Torah offers us a third option. And especially in this month of Elul, the third option is that you have something inside of you that is not war and doesn't need to resign itself. That this whole battleground was set up just for you because you have the power to enter it and not become part of it, to actually transform it. How's that possible? It's possible because you have a soul that remains intact. And when you get in touch with it, it gives you the power to rise above and never let yourself be shaped by the forces around you. So you meet, this may sound idealistic, but it's not so. Someone wrote to me a note on Facebook the other day that she posted some comment and then somebody attacked her for being naive and like new to the Facebook this, and she attacked them back, and she's basically writing to me that how come no one monitors this and stuff like that. Now, I understand her position, and of course I'm sure that she retreated. She wrote to me that she's unfriending everybody basically. Frankly, that may be good if all of us did that with the Facebook. So I'm not a big, I'm there, but I'm not there, if you know what I mean. There because it's one of the technologies. To me, it's another way of reaching people, so fine, so be it. It's like email, websites, whatever they are. Let's not take them too seriously. They're just tools. Once there was a telephone, today it's these technologies. As they say, technology is only that which was invented after you were born. Once the printing press was technology. Today it's considered to be natural. So I wrote back to her. I said to her, look, you can retreat and resign yourself, and you can't deal with this world. Or you're going out in the public forum. There's no way in Facebook or other public forums that people are sometimes going to be rude, or they don't mean it, or they do mean it. Who knows? And above all, maybe it's a challenge to us to maybe not be judgmental, because you never know what a person is going through and why sometimes someone is aggressive, like road rage. Maybe it's against their mother. For 30 years they're looking to express themselves. Now they have a place to vent. I'm not saying everyone is justified for everything they do, every dysfunctionality, and not trying to justify. But I wrote back to her, it's a challenge for you to engage, and through committing in a more powerful way to light than those that are committed to dark, you have the power to transform. This was how I was trained. So where I grew up and how I grew up, what I've seen in my life, I'm not sheltered, did not see some of the cruelties. Yes, I would say I was quite naive when I started giving this class over, I don't even want to tell you how many years. And you may guess my age. Some people have that problem, 28 years ago. Right? Actually, Jeff Levine could be a good litmus test, because you were what, 16, 17? I don't want to give away your age. Yeah. what did I read? That a gentleman is someone who remembers a woman's birthday but not her age. That's what I read. Robert Frost, I think. Why a woman's more than a man's, I don't know, but that's how it is. How does weight fit into the picture? That's another story, right? That's taboo. We don't talk about it. So obviously, as I said, I was quite naive in many ways. I have not seen, sadly, and maybe for the good, true dysfunctionality, I have to say. First times I was exposed to abuse that unimaginable, I don't even want to share right now. I couldn't believe it. I thought it wasn't true. I thought the people that shared it with me were exaggerating. But I learned pretty quickly that they weren't. And I've seen much pain since. In many ways, I think about my own younger years, that maybe it was healthy for me, in a sense, not to grow up in a battlefield. So then when I entered into it, I had more strength. That's a discussion. But at the same time, I see people who grew up in a battlefield, where they did not have, where their innocence was torn away from them far too early, whether it was through divorce or through other more overt abuse. Children their childhoods were basically aborted. I've seen plenty of it. But I've also seen people in those situations who did grow through it. And in many ways, I learned much from people like that. Because when I saw them, Teitzei. So for me, growing up in relatively, I mean, they say nobody's a functional home completely. I'm sure there's always some dysfunctionality somewhere. Me and my siblings are digging for it right now, these days. But relatively speaking, quite sheltered, I would say. So when I see somebody who grew up literally in a war zone, people who didn't see their mothers and fathers for years, ugly divorces, wars that schlepped the children into it, the whole everything. Not even talking about more, as I said, physical, sexual, emotional abuse. And then came to a point where they were able to discover their soul and discover that the war is not them. That is an achievement. So for someone who didn't grow up with that battle, okay. But for someone that did, I have seen enough people to tell you that it taught me the power of a soul. So this is not just theory that we're discussing here. It's actually very doable. It takes work. And thank God, not all of us necessarily have that type of severe challenge. But if someone who had terrible challenges, and I've seen some of the worst, can come to it, every one of us can. So you're talking about really finding love. Really finding love is understanding, yes, there's a real battle going on. But the battle is not about you. And as soon as you learn how to detach between you and the battle, you can begin to really discover a healthy relationship. You know, I just was counseling a couple where, I mean, it all starts ridiculous sometimes it's not so ridiculous. But in this case it was, I don't know what it was, the catalyst. And the husband felt that his wife didn't treat him properly. He gave her the silent treatment for 3 days. And as you know, we all know, the silent treatment can be much worse than anger. I mean, vocal anger. Because it's like complete invalidating, as if you don't exist. Make a long story short, how they ended up by me is another story, but they did. And it really didn't even matter to me what the woman did, even though there's always two sides of the story. But the way he reciprocated, to me, was just beyond acceptable ways. You know? What are you gaining by this? Like, what are you going to gain? As we all know, sometimes our reaction to something makes things worse. Even if the other person is to blame, that doesn't mean your reaction is always the healthy one. Yeah, you could always find an excuse for everything. She did this, he did that. But what you have here is the classic problem of two people who have become victims to their own personalities and do not have an ability to rise above it. That's the bottom line. Transcendence is only possible in the domain of the soul. The only way we can rise above something is if there's a soul that's stronger. Why don't we rise above? Because our pride is involved. I don't want to be the one that was wrong. I was wronged. And then we become vindictive, or we become vengeful, and we start making what they call cheshbonus. Like you start counting all the things that were done to you in your life. This all is the sign of insecure people in an insecure world. And I'm not blaming anybody. It is an insecure world. But above all, it means your soul is completely concealed. That's the bottom line. I didn't say those words to the guy. Couldn't hear it at the time. If I said that, he'd probably give me the silent treatment for a few days. Not that I really cared. So I had to find ways, but it was like sad. Because I saw a person who's trapped forever. He will be trapped here forever. There's no happy ending yet. We're working on it. So I'll report to you when I have something good to say. Meanwhile, I'm trying to get through to the guy that there's another dimension to life. But we'll see. To him, this is a completely appropriate thing. Probably his father did it to his mother or something like that. Or maybe the other way around. The point I'm making here is that we always have an option. Either you're going to become part of it or you remain above it. This doesn't mean that you overlook everything that's done to you and that you become this type of glassy-eyed guy or girl that doesn't really is oblivious to pain or oblivious to being hurt. It means that you have a soul that's vibrant. You have somewhere to turn to. You have a refuge, a home. What is really a home? A home is a place that in this hostile world you can always go to and know you'll be accepted unconditionally. Could a bird really fly on this earth if it didn't have a comfortable hearth, a nest? So paradoxically, the more comfortable the nest, the more confidence you have to fly. Because you have a place to go back to. The only thing that grows in two directions at once is a tree. And interestingly, the deeper the roots, the more powerful the tree will spread out. This is the secret of all life. That's what love does. Like water. It waters your soul. It gives you the confidence internally. And then when you enter out to the external world, you're not shaped by it. It all comes from within. So if the script was written in the best possible way, what we would have in our lives would be a healthy childhood, submerged in the waters of love, not only during pregnancy, but even afterwards. Prepared, so when you finally enter into a cruel, hostile battle, you know it's not me. I'm going into another place. You discover what my purpose is to be there. I'm here to transform it. But if your whole environment that you grew up with never allowed you to build that confidence, obviously your life has been a battleground. So now you go into a battle, it's just an extension of what you always had, and you're just one big victim of a vicious cycle of the blind leading the blind. So we're given this month of Elul once a year in preparation to the high holidays, and that says to us, to my beloved is to you, that you have inside of you a force that maybe is dormant, quiet, has not been fed, not been nourished for a long time. You may even lost touch with it, but it's there and it's always there, kicking, waiting. It will let you know and remind you from time to time. You know how? The soul reminds us through anxiety. Anxiety is a big voice of the soul. It tells you, I'm underfed, I'm undernourished, something's wrong. So those blues, or whatever else we experience that is like disconcerting, disturbing, is the voice of the soul, telling you that there's a disparity going on. So we have a month where we have the opportunity to revisit that place. 30 days, which leads us, of course, to another 30 days, the holidays. And the 60 days, which is the name of the book that I've written. It's really all about the story of finding love in our lives. And more importantly, as I mentioned last week, finding love even after loss. Not just finding it when nothing has affected you, but even after things have not gone right, things have been broken, things have been destroyed even, that you can find it. You can find it because your soul remains intact. And the more you feed it, the more it has the power to give you the strength to not become part of the battles that you will be surrounded by. So it's all about that nourishment that we all really must have. It's not really even optional. It's a necessity, just like food and drink. So the Parsha's lesson is teaching us, yes, it talks about the battles that we will encounter, but it talks about them in the context of outside of you, not you. So what we have to do, practically speaking, and how it applies to our relationships, so I'll just talk about two scenarios. Those of us that are still searching for that love, and those of us that are in it in one way or another. I should add, within it, there's also two options. You're in it and you're happy, you're in it, you're not happy. But I'll cover all these different scenarios. So we'll start backwards. If you're in a relationship, and you found someone that you feel you love, or at times that way, but there's also another side which comes with struggle, with battles. Things are not always going as smoothly as you like. There are, obviously, case by case, this has to be addressed case by case, and it's hard for me to speak in generic terms. But I will tell you a few basic principles that are vital. And this is overall, no matter what therapy or whatever intervention is going to happen, what's vital for a really long-term success in a relationship that exists already is you have to introduce fresh air. That's the bottom line. Most relationships, even if they have a basic, strong foundation, once you get into a place where there's hostility or strife, if you don't introduce fresh air, the stagnation will suffocate it and it'll get worse. Remember, things that don't get better get worse. It doesn't stay the same. So what's fresh air? Fresh air, in the context of our discussion, is you must bring in something that is not there in the relationship. It's like anything in life. If nothing changes, nothing changes. You get the brilliance of that? It means you want change, you have to precipitate change. You have to cause something to change. If I keep knocking like this here, you're going to hear always the same sound. If I want a different sound, I have to do something different. Like the favorite line I like to use for this is that if you think what you thought, and you say what you said, and you do what you did, what are you going to have? What you had. Impeccable mathematical equation. But we want to think, speak, and do the same thing, and with different results. How exactly, where are they supposed to come from, these different results? From heaven? From a stranger? Fresh air means, simply put, you have to introduce into that relationship something spiritual. Something soulful, something new. I'm not even saying what it is. It should be something that both parties want. You'll see immediately it'll change things. I mean in a serious way. I don't just mean some type of going to a spiritual comedy club one night. Is there such a thing? And if you're not in a relationship yet, or you're looking for one, or you're halfway into one, not sure which way it's going, the interesting solution is the same thing. Obviously, there it's different because the commitment is not there yet. There are people actually, I know this, I never advertised it, but I should mention it. And I don't know if this is good to mention. Yeah, I think so. There are people who brought their dates to this class here to see what their reaction would be. Because if someone comes to this class, so afterwards you sit down and you talk, usually provoke something. And there's a guy that told me, the girl I bring here, she's not interested in this stuff, I'm not interested in dating her. I don't know if that was a compliment to me, maybe it's a compliment to the subject matter. But definitely, you can discover things about people when you expose them to certain conversations. So I don't know, I'm not saying this as an advertisement that everyone should bring their dates here. That's not what I was trying to suggest. I was just saying it was interesting to me. But that was not what I was leading to. My point was, introduce something that's fresh. You could talk about money, you can talk about the economy, about politics, or even about love and relationships and sex, and 1,000 other things. Once you talk a little about the soul, and you start saying a lot of different things about a person. Yeah, it may break up the relationship too, it's true. I didn't say religion, I said soul. What I mean by soul is I don't mean it in a challenging way, or in a evangelical way, or proselytizing. I just mean a conversation about things that are more eternal, more theological, not even philosophical. Couples that I've counseled who are getting married, I always tell them, And I'm glad to say that it really works well. I said to them, make a commitment now before you get married. To have once a week to study something together, spiritual. Whether it's Hasidic thought or other mystical writing, or something that obviously they both relate to. But never break this commitment. Just recently, I know a couple that I've told this many years ago too, and they told me that this alone saved their marriage more than once. Because it was like something that was not about them and their needs. It was a commitment they made. Introduce once a month in your house, every 2 months, a class. You can't imagine the power of fresh air in a relationship. But not just fresh air, I mean open the windows. I mean fresh air in the metaphorical sense of something soulful, something different. This is what lets your soul speak. It's not some magical thing that I'm suggesting here. Once your soul comes out a bit, you become more at home. The home part. And battle becomes weaker. It's a simple equation. If 100% of your energy is invested in going into a war, there's no room for love. That's the bottom line. Or love becomes a battle. Or as I said before, love becomes retreat and resignation. If you introduce 10% of something that's not battle-oriented, then it's 90% left for the battle part. And obviously, it's in the ratio that's direct how much you introduce. I mean, these sound like numbers, and I'm not trying to be mathematical about it, but it's really as simple as that in a certain way. So why is it so difficult? Because we're creatures of habit. And don't ever underestimate your habits and my habits. They're very powerful. They're more powerful than you think. On paper, it's easy to say, tomorrow I start breaking my habit. But tell me how long those resolutions last. Because habit creates what's called teva sheni. It becomes almost like genetic. Some theorists say that we get rewired through habits, which means your actual physical system gets rewired when you do something many times. Maybe it's not quite as powerful as being born with it, but nurture has almost as strong impact as nature if it's repeated enough times. That's really the difficulty, because we're trapped in our own habits. We're trapped in our patterns. Which is why this is critical to be a commitment. That's why we have the concept of commitment. It's true we live in a democracy, and people can do whatever they like, and no one forces you to do something. We're talking about enforcing yourself. Because if you don't enforce it, what will fight the power of the habit? That's why sometimes we need to blindly accept a certain commitment. I'm talking about a good commitment. So how bad could it get? The worst scenario. I mentioned last week modani, to say in the morning when you awake. People have told me last week after the class, and I mean throughout the week after the class, and previous times. It's a great idea, but I can do it once, twice, 3 days go by, I don't do it. Can't keep up with it. And there's only one reason, not because you lose time, it's only a minute in the morning, because of habit. The only way to fight that is absolute commitment, like there's no way out. That's why sometimes taking on a resolution with somebody else, like we'll do something together, so you're stuck. I'll be honest with you, many of the things that I do are in that type of category. I get myself stuck in some good thing, good project, and that's it. Like even making the move to this place here in space. Trust me, I have many reasons not to do it. And I could always justify, I have other things I can do. I can write, I can teach, internet. But I know very well what all those resistance, and once you realize it's the right thing to do, the only way to fight the habit is you just take the leap. And then you hire people, you connect, no way out. Commitments have been made, you're stuck. Now your pride is on the line, your name is on the line, your credibility, your ego, that's it. You can turn all that, which are all so-called, you could say sometimes negative elements, into positive ones if you direct it to good things. Every one of you can do that. And that's why this month is a month of resolutions. I hate using that word because New Year resolutions is the biggest joke of them all. But in Hebrew we call it hachlotas, hachlota teva, which basically means resolution. It means that you turn to God, you turn to your soul, and you make a commitment. The thing that you have to focus on is that this is not a commitment to someone else. It's a commitment to yourself. Are you betraying your soul and your destiny and your calling or not? And that's something serious to be taken seriously. Because if you are, you really think you're going to find a healthy soulmate? If you betray your own soul? Is it possible? And that's not a question of a punishment or a curse or a threat. It just doesn't work. How could you find a soulmate when you're not a mate with your own soul? You're not at peace with your own soul. So this month of El, I am to my beloved is to me, is an opportunity to make a decision. And each in our own way. I mean, obviously, as much as I've said here, there has to be certain, as I mentioned, it's certain, ultimately it is general terms, meaning I can't talk case by case, because each of us has a different challenge, a different battle, and it manifests in different ways. For instance, some of you may say, well, look, all this sounds nice and good, but I'm right now engaged in such a battle, I have no time to even think about this. So what's the answer to that? Well, again, case by case, I could just say, if I was sitting with you one-on-one and that's what you would tell me, what I would try to explore is, okay, there's short-term solutions and long-term. No one's suggesting yet you can suddenly stop everything when you're going 90 miles an hour. But to be completely consumed by it may be your undoing. So maybe there's room to find within your life something that you can introduce, something in your life that you can find peace at, that you're not completely at battle. In other words, short-term, sometimes you have to do what you have to do. But you have to start putting some longer-term things in place, or else the years, the clock ticks, the years go by, and all you'll know is in 10 years from now you're still in the battle. And then what? And where does it stop? And then, of course, there's the opposite extreme. We retreat, which is usually what happens. You get worn out, enough fighting, and I just give up. And what does that do to your soul and spirit? So it demoralizes you. Every time you think about it, my life has been one of resignation. How good can that be? So there is a third option. It's ultimately understanding why you were put on this earth, not to fight wars, not to resign, because you have a soul that's waiting to be released. And what are you doing to release it? Not I, and not anyone on this earth can release your soul. We can help each other. We can inspire each other. We can speak, we can teach, we can ignite. But the bottom line is the release has to happen by you. You are the one that holds the keys, and it's your prison, sometimes of your making, sometimes of other people's making. But the bottom line is you do have the power to get out of there. So, in that context, the search for love, the battle of love, is more than just looking and finding a soulmate. I'm sure there are quick fixes and solutions that different people suggest, and some of them may be fine. I am obviously discussing a more holistic and a more comprehensive approach than just quick fix, something that will be lasting. And will be lasting is when your soul starts emerging, there's no question that your soulmate will also emerge. No doubt in my mind. I've seen it many, many times. I've also seen the opposite. I've seen people, I remember meeting a couple who 7, 8 years ago, when they met, were not for each other, and that's it. They dated a few times. Today they're happily married with 3 to 4 children, 3.5 children to be exact. Half meaning in the middle of a pregnancy. It's not a right expression, actually. But, and I asked them once, I said, so well, tell me exactly what, they met actually this class. So what happened 7 years ago? Bottom line was he was busy building a career, she was busy being fired from a career. They were so consumed with the moment, they didn't have time for each other. That's the bottom line. They couldn't even look at each other. I mean, they dated, but they didn't really have space. As soon as she got fired, and so did he after a while, so the vacuum, as I mentioned before, the bittul that created, suddenly there was space. With space, you start thinking about other things. I'm not suggesting we have to wait for that, but we can impose that upon ourselves. If you realize you have options, you're not a victim, you're not trapped. You have a soul that's always there. The question is, as I said, are you giving it time? Forget about equal time, a little time. And your soul is your child, just for the record. That child that was hurt and was trapped in a battleground is your soul. Your soul always remains there and waiting for you to build it a home. And that's what it comes down to. Will we build a home for our souls? A place where your soul feels comfortable, a place where your soul feels welcome. And the first one to welcome your soul is yourself. Even though it may sound strange, but your own inner child, your own soul sometimes does not feel at home in your life. If you're a battler and you're fighting or you're retreating, soul does not feel comfortable. It's not its nature. So who's your soul's biggest enemy? Not your enemies, you. Sadly. It's called being your own worst enemy. So obviously we need to find people who can help cultivate, nurture, and give us confidence in that dimension within ourselves. And that's what this month is really an asset for, to help us, give us that strength. So please see me at Meaningful Life Center. And of course the book 60 Days that I wrote, which was really meant to be something that you can't always provide face to face. You only sit with that many people. In a book you're able to also put something that someone can take home with them, review in their own way. We send out this daily 60-day thing that many people receive. You can feel free to subscribe to it. And I feel always moved and actually humbled by the effect it has on people. Remember, it's not my wisdom, it's not my teachings, it's things that I have really just culled from the sources and tried to process and apply to real life challenges. So it shouldn't remain abstract or just academic, theoretical subjects, but things that talk to our lives, personal lives. And I welcome any way your feedback or any thoughts that you have on this so-called journey through Elul and Tishrei. I just mentioned to someone today I met that I asked them if they're coming to the class tonight. So they said they have to go somewhere. So I said, but they said, but we follow your book every day. So I say, that's better because my book doesn't have a Yetzer Hara. And I do. We call it an animal soul. So it's interesting. You can write a book that doesn't have a Yetzer Hara, but maybe my Yetzer Hara is hidden there somewhere between the lines. If you find it, let me know. I'm sure an author puts more than just one dimension in there. So I definitely encourage you. The books are available if you'd like to get them. I'll be happy to sign them if you like as well. I know that's I don't know. But the point I'm making here is that we're in a special month and we're leading into a high holiday season. As I mentioned last week, I'll actually be leading the high holidays here, right here. And you're all welcome. If any of you are interested in the details, to talk to me or to Velvel. Go away, Velvel. Okay. And I plan to lead them, as I've done in the past, but only in a more intensified way, precisely as I spoke here at the class, in a very personal and very relevant way. Because the prayers, I can testify to this. I grew up went to yeshiva and went to schools and all that. The prayers can be quite foreboding. Is that the right word? Overwhelming. It's Hebrew, much of it's difficult Hebrew. But at the same time, if you really decipher it and you apply it, it can be an unbelievable experience. So I know for myself that it's not just an experience I share with you, but when we do the services together, it's a mutual force. So I definitely welcome that experience. If any of you will be here, please let me know, and it would be really a very special and meaningful thing. So we'll be doing Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, and the meals for that matter as well, in case you're hungry, after all this. So let me conclude as I began, being that it's a month of blessing and a month of love, that there's an expression in the Torah that says, Torah mikro v'ani ena, God says, that even before you call out, I answer you. That means when you make a decision in your heart that you want to open yourself up to your soul or to whatever good decision you make, God doesn't even have to wait till you pray and actually articulate it. He answers even before you begin. So I want to wish everybody, if we just make for a moment that type of decision, obviously if you do something about it, it won't hurt. But God should answer our requests. And we should build a home for our souls. And the more homes for the souls of our souls, the more comfortable others that come around you will be. That's natural. And hopefully, when you walk around and people meet you, and they probably won't admit or tell you this, but you'd like to know, when people meet you, your friends, do they feel uplifted, warmed, by your presence or the opposite. And the same is true the other way around. You know, you meet people, some people you meet, you feel always uplifted, you feel empowered, you feel enlightened. This is when people's soul are emerging, when people have a home for that soul. So let's all be resolved to be able to do that. And there's no question that will cover a little part of the corner of the earth that you were given to protect and to nurture. So everyone should have a very excellent week this month of Elul. Next week I shall continue and resume this discussion on the next theme of the month of Elul. Tomorrow night, Philip, some of you may know, does his class here, singer-songwriter. You're all welcome to come. What time is it, 7 o'clock? At 7 o'clock. And then let me say that this class is dedicated in loving memory to Martin Lindsay Ackerman, it's Chaya ben Mordechai, by his daughter Candace Ackerman. And if anybody wants to dedicate a class or any of our programs or webcasts that reach many thousands of people, it's a great way to link a memory or of a loved one or a birthday or any other special significant life cycle. So please either speak to me again or Velvel, or you can call my office. If you're interested in the high holiday details, you can do the same. My office is already set up to take care of it all. I think tonight or tomorrow is going to send out an email with a website, and all the technologies will be set into motion, including Facebook. Anyway, with all that being said, it's, as I said, a beautiful honor and pleasure to sit with kindred spirits, with souls, and I hope at least this evening we felt a bit at home in your souls, as mine did. And let's try to spread it a little outward outside of this building as well. And always see the Meaningful Life Center as a friend, including myself. In any way, a friend to your soul, and I hope you'll be friends to mine. Everyone have a very good evening. Thank you.